Ontario, and apologize for starting a few minutes late here. We're just having a little bit of technical problems. Everything seems to be up and running now. Welcome to our webinar today, Career Ladders, Providing Opportunities for Ontario's Working Adults, hosted by John McLaughlin, Director of Research and Policy here at Essential Skills Ontario, Anne-Marie Wazalowski, Executive Director at Literacy Northwest, Janine Agnucata, Executive Director at Literacy Network of Durham Region, and Tamara Katari, Executive Director at Literacy Link South Central. So just before we get started, I want to give you a few instructions. So at the right-hand side of your screen, there you can chat with each other in the chat pane and ask questions. If it's a technical question, I will try my best to assist you throughout the webinar, so feel free to ask at any time. If it's a content question, also feel free to ask, and I will try to, not interrupt, but interrupt nicely. As well, we'll have time for Q&As at the end of the webinar. So while I would like to introduce each of our presenters, we have a packed full webinar full of interesting information. So if each of the presenters feel like saying a few words about themselves when they speak, go ahead. But first, I will pass it over to our very own John McLaughlin to get going. Oh, and just a reminder as well, before we get too far in, if you want to follow the conversation on Twitter, here's our hashtag here, and we'd love to keep the conversation going online. So now over to John McLaughlin, and he's going to start and give us an introduction to Career Ladders and the context to the project, which we're researching in our other host. Go ahead, John.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. And first off, I want to say what a pleasure it is to have spent some time over the past year working with Tamara, Janine, and Anne-Marie in those various communities. So I first off want to really thank them for their work. As many people know, the issue or the problem of low income and low skilled workers, what some people say is poverty and working environments, has been a long-standing issue that has troubled policymakers, practitioners, programs, and other stakeholders as well. So here at ESO, starting about 3 years ago, we started to look for and examine promising approaches being applied elsewhere that can move the dial on this seemingly intractable problem. We say all too often when workers want to advance in their careers, they have to actually remove themselves from their current jobs to participate in traditional education and training opportunities. So, for example, if you're a single mom working in a low-wage job, there often isn't enough kinds of opportunities for you to be able to stay in the job and look at some progressive training opportunities. Our system, frankly, has not been designed with those sort of folks in mind. So as I said, for many workers, sequential training is just not a realistic option. If you don't have your high school diploma, you basically have to go get your GED or high school equivalency, then move on to college or some other training. It's often very inconvenient times, right? As I said, most do not have the luxury to forego wages or have the time to take part in traditional training. Once again, I draw upon the concept of a single parent. So, but at the same time, we hear from employers that they're struggling to find skilled workers who can move up and grow within their business. Although, I will admit, the evidence around that without appropriate labor market information is somewhat mixed. So, to solve the problem, we need to recognize that complex issues, and the complex issues of the working poor, is not likely to respond to a simple solution, a simple program, or a single intervention, and that the issue of individual economic mobility is correlated to a whole variety of factors, right? So particularly if we, and ESO now has the opportunity to look at and examine the 2011 census data along with the recent Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, known as PIAC. At no time in history have we seen such a strong correlation between educational attainment, skills, and work experience, right? So right now, it's so transparent about the importance of educational attainment and its impact on employment. Okay? The socioeconomic conditions of the working poor have to be placed into context. What are local labor market opportunities? As we look at so many other jurisdictions, and when we first started talking about demand-side training and demand-side systems, that was a bit new a few years ago. But increasingly now, we do see that training systems recognize that you actually have to look at what local employers actually need. We also know that local programming, services, and supports are critical in terms of building local human capital. So we've been interested in this for quite a while. And one of the things that was most startling to us through PIAC was this particular issue. And it didn't get a ton of play in the Canadian media, but it was something which our data analysts had spent a fair bit of time examining. So we found it a little bit disconcerting, but what we see is the increasing skill divide across the country, and in Ontario in particular. So what we see from this chart is that, frankly, and I'll try and sum it up quickly, is that those with skills, those with post-secondary, college, or bachelor degrees, continue to get the most training, right? They're the most likely to continue participating or have dollars allocated towards their training, right? Meanwhile, the converse side of that is those with the least education are getting the least amount of training. And this is true not just for our overall workforce, but also on the job training as well. And if you actually put these two charts over each other, they reflect each other. So we see that public expenditures, employer expenditures, and personal expenditures on education and training decline as you get to groups with less education. So what this will tell us is that the skills divide in this province will continue to grow. And it should also be noted that PIAC, of all OECD countries that were part of PIAC, Canada perhaps had, it's a term known as, had the fattest tails, i.e. Ontario does very well when it comes to highly skilled individuals. We're sort of at the top of the chart when you compare us to other provinces and OECD countries. But we also, comparative to other countries, have an awful lot of folks, or proportion of the population, who are at the very bottom end in terms of skills. We're also aware of one of the challenges in our system, and Essential Skills Ontario is currently working on a piece with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to examine what's the disconnect with employers and industry and our employment and training system. Right? So it's well documented. The OECD did a study, case study on Ontario back in 2012, and said, compared to most other jurisdictions, Ontario probably has one of the weakest relationships with employer groups between its employment training system and various industries. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce, in Emerging Stronger, so their annual plan for growth in Ontario, also noted the disconnect, as did the Francis Lankin report and the Reform of Ontario Public Services. And the federal budget was probably the strongest in calling it out. And once again, though, I will note that some of the data has been mixed. So, what sort of framework is best to actually engage employers? What sort of framework will help those who we would roughly describe as the working poor achieve economic mobility? I have to go back and jump to line. So, career ladders. These are also known throughout Europe and the United States, and to a lesser extent Australia and Singapore. They come in many different forms. They're also known as career pathways, stackable learning, and or career ladders. And while they take on many different forms, and I'm going to touch on those in a couple of minutes, you know, probably the best description comes from the United States Department of Education. Right? So they would say that career pathways or career ladders are a series of connected education and training strategies that enable individuals to secure employment within a specific occupational sector, i.e. manufacturing, food processing, logistics and transportation are all examples, healthcare, and advance over time to successively higher levels of education and employment in that sector, right? So that each step on a pathway is designed to prepare the participant for the next level of education and employment. Basically what they're trying to do is align training, courses, and education along with occupational progression. So some of the characteristics that you'll see in virtually every system is that training opportunities are chunked into shorter unit sizes. And this is, to some extent, part of the career technical education system in the United States, right? So that basically you don't have to leave the workforce for 2 years in order to gain certificates. So they stack certificates, and ultimately those certificates that you're taking part-time or possibly online eventually will build into a 2-year degree. But you also have certificates that employers or industry sectors recognize. Right? As I mentioned, they're broken into small and obtainable units that reflect the competencies and skills associated with each specific occupation. Training content is customized. Training providers and employers are encouraged to make work learner-friendly. Social agencies are enlisted to address other barriers outside of the workplace. And this is an interesting phenomenon of career ladders, is in most systems, so what in Ontario we have is Employment Services or Ontario Works, in most of the jurisdictions, the day that someone finds the job does not mean that they are finished with employment counseling or employment support, a critical feature. So what do career ladders hope to accomplish? Well, at its very core, program alignment with industry and economic development. Right? Increased participation of low-income, lower-skilled workers in training. And although there haven't been tons of rigorous studies about career ladders, the Department of Labor did one last year where they examined what a community was like before it did career ladders or career pathways and what it looked like 7 years later. And they have increased the participation of the working poor in employment in training by about 50%. It attempts to accelerate learning and skills building. In fact, a number of career pathways initiatives use the phrase further, faster, better. They have stackable learning aligned with local industry and occupations, as we mentioned. A coherent system for both workers and employers, right? So it's transparent, and people and individuals coming into the system have a pretty good understanding of what certificates they need in order to, say, move from being a retail clerk to becoming a retail manager, right? Increased private and public investment for those who would benefit most. This is, I think, a really important underlying philosophy for all career ladders. Oops. So there's many types, as I may have mentioned before. Currently, right now in the United States, 31 states have some iteration of career pathways. The Obama administration, in fact, through its Department of Labor, has just invested $215 million more into developing career pathways at state levels. But a few of them have been around for a while. And so I'll try and describe 3 iterations. First off, one of the oldest is port jobs in Seattle. And port jobs, very explicitly, I guess, probably going back 10 years ago, Seattle decided that it was going to become the largest port on the western seaboard of the United States. And they realized that in order to do this, that they had to do a number of things, particularly around human capital. So working in conjunction with the logistics and supply chain sector, they developed really clear pathways for individuals not only to get into what were known as port jobs, but also to find ways in which they can upgrade the existing workforce and allow for progressive opportunities for workers as well. Since it started, it's become a central part of Seattle's economic development. They even have something called Port Jobs University, which provides training not just for the ports, but for Seattle's airport as well. A number of studies have been done on this, and the results from this strategy, right, of getting Seattle colleges, getting Seattle community-based programs to start to think about how they can customize their training to allow for entry into port jobs and to progress within port jobs is quite impressive. Another model, working out of Boston, and probably one of the oldest career pathways models, is SkillWorks. And unlike port jobs, which is really about system coordination, a group of training providers and economic development officers getting together and trying to chart occupational progression out and training out, SkillWorks used a different approach. SkillWorks, for all intents and purposes, acts as a foundation, and they use dollars to economically incent training delivery agencies to try and align their delivery with occupational progression. They do this in the healthcare sector, they've done it with green jobs, and probably to the most effect in the healthcare sector. 10 years on, SkillWorks has brought very, very significant achievements into Boston. They even help programs, trainers, and colleges think about supply chain. They work closely with employers. So, for example, they know the number of sous chefs that restaurants will be hiring, right, in the upcoming year. It's, of course, just an estimate. But then what they try and do is only provide enough training to line cooks, sort of the next step to becoming a sous chef, right, with the appropriate kind of training. So basically trying to manage supply and demand. They say in SkillWorks now has been around for years and has really been able to help programs align training. And one of the things I should have noted right from the bat, and as we move into some of our work, these things, right, many of the career ladders that we see take between 5 and 7 years to actually create, right, before you actually see, sort of as I would describe, any sort of meaningful training. So even in terms of our project, we had limited aspirations that we've learned from all of these different projects, slow, deliberate steps to go from feasibility to planning to technical expertise. All of those things need to be accomplished before you can actually start to deliver any of this to anyone.
John, do you mind if I interrupt for 2 seconds? I just want to remind people, if you do have a question, please type it in the question pane. We're going to do it through typing today just to make sure that we move along. And I just want to get to one question first, John, before we move on to the next section. Yeah. Industry funding for training in Ontario is 40% of what it was in 1993. Why is industry so averse to funding training? Just quickly.
Oh, I mean, so what, Alison, can I ask a little bit of a clarification? Why does industry not train more?
I think so.
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, I think that's an excellent question. The the fact that it's not just an Ontario phenomenon, it's a Canadian phenomenon, that employers in Canada are less likely to invest in workplace training than other jurisdictions. We know that. It is really unclear why this particular culture within industry occurs, both in very different ways. The federal government and the provincial governments are trying to examine how they can increase employer investment in this. We think career ladders may be one approach that could assist in that. It certainly has in the United States and Singapore, where we've looked and examined things more often. It may just relate to the disconnect that seems to exist within our employment and training system, right, for lack of a better phrase. And I want to note that it's a joint responsibility for correcting this. It's a responsibility of government, it's a responsibility of our employment and training system, and most importantly, it's a responsibility for employers and their employees. And I will get back to the one slide. Right? Canadian employers are actually pretty good about investing dollars into those with post-secondary attainment. They're absolutely terrible at funding those with high school or less for additional training. Okay?
Perfect.
So, yeah, great, thanks. And I'll try and move this along a little bit. One of the most interesting models and most studied, it's part of a large study being done by MDRC in the United States, is the work advance model, which emanated out of the New York Center for Economic Opportunity. It's also being now replicated in 4 other states. Work advance basically works from a counseling model. So what they will have is an employment center that is specifically related to a specific industry sector. For example, supply chain and logistics. So anyone, an employed person or employed person who is involved in that industry can get counseling from Work Advance. Work Advance counsels not only people looking for a job, but those who are caught in lower wage jobs as well. They have dollars and counselors that will facilitate occupational progression. They also have dollars to buy training for individuals in order that they will be able to advance in that workplace. Right? As I say, randomized control trials are indicating that when compared to more traditional sort of broad industry or broad employment engagement, that the results when compared to those types of services, Work Advance shows very strong results when it comes to 2 groups, those with multiple workplace barriers and youth. So once again, and I'd like to thank Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities and Employment Ontario for funding a 1-year project which allowed ESO, in cooperation with our 3 regional partners, to examine the feasibility of replicating the career ladders or career pathways approach in the province of Ontario. So, sort of the meat and potatoes, we've been working with Literacy Link South Central and the Literacy Network of Durham Region and Literacy Northwest to take the initial steps towards seeing if this type of approach could work within the Ontario landscape. So running the project, helping communities towards integrated and responsive service delivery, tested the emerging concepts. And I'll let my colleagues here explain a little bit more about the meat and potatoes in a moment. But we built off a number of aspects that we learned from virtually every successful career pathways, career ladders approach, right? So we created what are described as integrated planning groups. So involving the local board, employment service agencies, workforce development bodies, LDS agencies, municipal workers, particularly Ontario Works, who they may stand to benefit from this approach, the local community college, chambers of commerce, social planning councils, and economic development bodies. Right? And each member of an IPG really brought their expertise and experience in order to assess how or if this approach could be mapped and developed in each specific community. As I want to note, there is no firm guidebook on how these things are developed. In fact, you know, a career ladder in Louisiana looks remarkably different than one in Wisconsin. They're really place-based activities, right? So that they emerge from a community instead of a government imposing a particular framework on a community, right? Because every community is different, and we all know that, and that there's no cookie-cutter solution, right? So what if, as Anne-Marie would undoubtedly tell you, what may work in Brantford will not be necessarily what will work in Thunder Bay or at the communities around Thunder Bay. Each regional network developed an environmental scan to review what assets each community has in terms of data. So we examined all of the data in each community in terms of what industries were there, what occupations were there, and what did some of the census data tell us about emerging trends as well. Right? We looked at employment rates, poverty rates, economic indicators. You know, what are the projections of growth? Right? So in terms of selecting an industry, each region took a slightly different approach based on what worked for them and the local resources available, because once again, not every community has the same data assets. So now I'll pass it over to Janine. Hello.
Thank you, John. Oh, thank you, John. So just to speak briefly to the LiNDR experience, we became involved in the Career Ladders Initiative, and there's sort of several themes that kind of emerged as we became aware of career ladders that fit very neatly in with some things that were happening in our community. For one, we are co-located with our local planning board, so we had been having some fairly robust discussions over the last little while about how to better design essential skills training in a way that would meet the needs of employers. And we would talk a lot about labor market information and the disconnect between what was happening in our labor market with rapid reemployment and auto workers being recycled to new jobs and what their particular training needs are. We also knew from our own experience as literacy and basic skills providers in the community that very often our learners would kind of enter and exit programs based on employment availability, and we didn't seem to have a lot of good history creating some sort of concurrent system where our learners would stay necessarily in a training system while they had entry-level employment available. The other kind of emerging themes that made us quite interested in career ladders was really related to our very close relationship with Ontario Works and how to better stream their clients into employment and training and literacy programming. So we kind of were very interested in the initiative simply because we thought that there was a very viable chance that in Durham, with some of our community planning links and the fact that we were initiating a learning communities approach in Durham to solving community problems, that career ladders could really help us fine-tune some of the basic skills and essential skills training taking place in the community around particular labor market needs. And as I said, that was sort of an ongoing theme. We kind of found it very easy to assemble an independent planning group in the sense that we already had fairly strong communications with our Economic Development and Social Planning Council. We had been working with both of those in a couple of side initiatives and had very strong relationships. So it was from there that we went on to sort of assemble post-secondary deans and appropriate people, as well as representatives on Ontario Works and our employment service managers. But when we were assembling that independent planning group, what we were really looking at, more than just assembling a committee, was trying to identify what we refer to as brokers. So our model for the independent planning group was very much based on the concept of trying to identify people within a specific key area that would support career ladders in the future, who could, that individual would need to act as not just a champion, but someone as a connector. So that in the college we were looking for a dean or a senior staff person who was close enough to the ground to help us make connections within the institution. And this has worked out quite nicely in the sense that we've been able to identify at our community college existing curriculum in our particular chosen sector that has never been delivered. We wouldn't have known that if we didn't have a sort of a broker in that particular role at the college. And did the same thing with the university, our local university, and had the kind of government relations person come on board. So we sort of chose that committee based on how they were going to be able to mobilize in the future around the Career Ladders initiative. We settled on the food processing industry, sort of food processing slash agriculture slash agri-grow business for a number of reasons. Our local training board, or sorry, our local planning board was very much the kind of mover and shaker behind the data that we used to substantiate our decision. We have a number of significantly growing industries in Durham, and some of them have very significant volumes of staff. So we initially looked to some of those kind of obvious ones like advanced manufacturing and the service sector. But when we started to pull apart and analyze the data, what we determined was that there would be specific roadblocks in adopting a career ladders model around things like advanced manufacturing because of things that we hadn't really considered at the onset, such as unionism or the difficulty in accessing employees in a highly organized, very large workforce. The other overlaying data we used to identify our sector was some information that was assembled by our local economic development departments for the region of Durham, who sort of talked about what faster growing areas of industry we had in the community and what their particular training needs were. So they had gone out to the major industries that were showing growth projections in 2011 and then asked specific questions about the projected or expected workforce and specifically training needs. And what we found over and over again was that food processing and agriculture repeatedly came up as very small sector of our economy in Durham, but one that was probably among the fastest growing and certainly the most amenable to training, in the sense that they readily identified frequently that they needed to upskill their workforce and quickly, and that they had very specific and very easy to define training needs. So we used that data to sort of as a starting point, and then met with a number of people within that industry over the course of the year in terms of carrying out consultations with several of the local agriculture associations. We did do some direct hand-to-hand with small employers and started to validate our decision based on that. So in Durham region, for instance, there are about 1,400 farms and or food processing outlets, and we talked to only a handful, obviously, in the first phase of the initiative. But we were really impressed by the organization, sort of the local organization of those small businesses. And for the most part, we're really looking at a number of small businesses that have very specifically defined expectations for training and needs for growth. We spent quite a bit of time, I will say, over the course of the project, making it our business to find out as much as we can about the rural north of Durham. One of the other reasons why career ladders and agriculture food processing really resonated with us in the first phase was that we do have an issue underserving our rural north, and Durham is about 40% rural and agriculturally designated. We've not done as a community a particularly great job of meeting the needs of that rural north, and especially not connecting with those industries that exist in that 40% landmass. So this gave us also an opportunity to meet some overarching community objectives in terms of reconnecting with constituents and employers and learners and potential citizens who've just not been receiving replete attention in that area. So what we were surprised to find through the process of the first phase was that most of the, I mean, it was a surprise and it wasn't a surprise, was really looking at the fact that many of the people that we will be dealing with probably come from the Ontario Works pool. It just seems like that is going to be a key part of our future initiative. We sort of knew that, and we were a little bit surprised also to realize that there was going to be so much interest and uptake by the Ontario Works office in this particular area. The other thing that we found, which will give a very unique flavor to our particular type of career ladders initiatives in the future, will be that many of the agriculture and food processing businesses that we're talking to have indicated to us that most of the employers we would work with will only have a handful of employees at any given time who need training or upskilling. So we will have to create some sort of a consortium or kind of batch model of delivering training to a number of employers across a wide geographic area. So I think distance learning and flexible learning options will probably become extremely important to us, and we'll have to find some flexible way of meeting those needs. So we're sort of excited about that opportunity. And really, I think that what we see in our community as being the benefit is that this is really an opportunity to have addressed particular substantiated needs in our community in terms of the training that's required, the industries that need trained employees, and have a very viable entry-level job track available. It helps us meet the needs of people who are substantially very poorly off in our community. We have some systemic issues of poverty and a very static Ontario Works caseload in Durham region. So we know that the people who are the most needy and the people who are impoverished and have barriers to entry-level employment, these are individuals who we know are kind of systemically barriered and have been so in the same kind of volume, but probably 9,400 cases on our Ontario Works roll, and that number just doesn't change over a 10-year reflection. So those are sort of the key highlights of the Durham experience. I think that when my colleagues speak, you'll probably note that there are some significant changes from community to community, but at that point, this is sort of my roll-up of our work so far.
Thank you very much, Janine. That was great. Anne-Marie, we'll ask you to take over the reins for a moment.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Wedzlowski, and I'm with Literacy Northwest, and we're located in Thunder Bay. Through the annual literacy services planning process and our partnerships with employment service agencies and the 2 local boards in our region, we were very much aware of the fact that while in our region there's many entry-level job opportunities, particularly in the service and retail sectors and growth in those sectors, many of these jobs or positions remained unfilled, so employers were having a difficult time finding people. Secondarily, there's a very high turnover rate in these positions, so that indicated that employers weren't able to keep the people that they had. And then thirdly, employers spent a lot of time and resources on recruitment and hiring for these positions. So if people stayed in those positions, they would be able to spend less dollars and resources on recruitment and hiring and reallocate those resources to their budget for training. So because the career ladders concept recognized the fact that most people in entry-level positions don't want to stay there forever, they can't afford to stay there forever, but they need the opportunity to learn while they're working. So to learn and earn to improve their employment and income prospects, the career ladders partnership opportunity, when it was presented to us, was very timely. We were eager to get involved, and it provided us with the support and the resources needed to explore and share the concept with the community. Literacy Northwest, we used the local Employment Plus Committee as the springboard to introduce the Career Ladders concept to the community of Thunder Bay. The committee is hosted by the North Superior Workforce Planning Board, and it has a very diverse membership which includes Employment Ontario Employment Service and Literacy and Basic Skills agencies, secondary and post-secondary education organizations, both the college and the universities, Aboriginal employment and skills training agencies, and a wide range of social service agencies like OW, ODSP, March of Dimes, Multicultural Association, and the list goes on. So we felt that this was an opportune group to be able to introduce the Career Ladders concept to the community. This group's favorable response to the Career Ladders concept led Literacy Northwest to partner with the North Superior Workforce Planning Board to host a Career Ladders Town Hall in Thunder Bay in November of 2013. The Planning Board distributed the event invitation to its broad network of contacts, which resulted in 70+ people attending the town hall. So we were very pleased with the attendance. So event participants included the Employment Plus group as well as municipal, township, and First Nations representatives, employer and employee group reps, employers, economic development, FedNord, a wide range of social service agencies, and other stakeholders. The event evaluation form provided participants with the opportunity to express their interest in the integrated planning group, and if they were interested, they were able to provide us with their contact information. So while the integrated planning group was formed from these initial contacts, recruitment is ongoing, and the contact list is expected to expand as we move forward with the Career Ladders initiative. The integrated planning group chose the retail industry based on the recognized need and the level of employer interest. Our integrated planning group also acted very much as brokers for the network as a project partner. So an example of this is our employment service reps on the integrated planning group reached out to the retail employers that they worked with in terms of job placements for their clients. So employers who they thought might be interested or could benefit from the Career Ladders project, and they asked if they'd like to explore it. So those employers that expressed that they were interested were then introduced to the Career Ladders coordinator, Stuart Callio, who to date has conducted 4 employer interviews to gather and share information. So we had 1 hardware store employer, a grocery store employer, and 2 drugstore employers. The detailed interview results are being compiled into a report, and then they're going to be shared at our next integrated planning group meeting for the group's review and to inform our next steps. A couple of challenges that we've had, and I believe my other partners would most likely have similar challenges, is coordinating the meetings, both with the employers and integrated planning group members. People are very busy and calendars just are jam-packed, so it's quite often difficult to coordinate those meetings, time-consuming, and then following up with those that aren't able to attend the meeting to keep them informed and connected is really important. So that also takes time and resources. Benefits, though, of the work of moving forward with this work certainly has been being able to strengthen existing partnerships, forging new partnerships, the sharing of the wealth of information and expertise around the table, the commitment of the IPG group, and definitely the quality of the information and support we've received from Essential Skills Ontario to make it possible to roll this concept out in our community. So that's just a bit of a snapshot of the experience that we've had.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And now I'll pass the baton over to Tamara.
Thanks, John. It's Tamara Cottery from Literacy Link South Central, and we are based out of London. So as the third bullet point on your screen says, about 45% of the adults in the Grand Erie region don't have post-secondary credentials, and about 15% of that group don't have a grade 12. A few years ago, the Workforce Planning Board of Grand Erie took the lead in developing something called the Education Works Alliance. And the Education Works Alliance is a community group that is dedicated to building prosperity through training, education, and lifelong learning. Its goal was to promote learning and education to make Grand Erie a center of learning and to create a culture that values education and learning as a pathway to prosperity. So when we first heard of the career ladders that they existed at an annual general meeting for Essential Skills Ontario, I was really struck at that time with how well career ladders could potentially meet some of the goals of Education Works Alliance. So we reached out to ESO, and the rest is history. We were a partner on this last year's worth of projects. In terms of how we chose our participants for the integrated planning group, we were also fortunate, I think, as Janine mentioned, to piggyback on some existing groups, the Education Works Alliance being one of them. When it came time for us to recruit members for the integrated planning group, we put out a call to the members of the Education Works Alliance. And through Literacy Link South Central's experience in service coordination and planning, we had a pretty good idea of which perspectives we would need to have around the table in order to thoroughly explore the feasibility of career ladders for our area. I guess there was one partner that stood out in my mind, one of the people or organizations that is on our integrated planning group that I might not have naturally come up with on my own. And that's a representative from the local poverty roundtable. And I think Janine was mentioning the strong connection to poverty. We had Ontario Works as a member of the IPG, sorry for the acronym, Integrated Planning Group, but we wanted another member that could speak to the forces that affect poverty as well. So as you can see, we actually landed on food processing as well. We knew that Janine was pursuing food processing in the LiNDR area as well, but we thought maybe looking at how two different networks were approaching the same sector would be beneficial. We were already sold on the idea of career ladders, but our integrated planning group needed to come up with a sector in which career ladders could be explored. And this was trickier than we anticipated, as there were a number of factors that we needed to consider and different sources of data to review. Provincial labor market information suggested several possible sectors to explore, but we tempered the provincial data with local intelligence. Food processing was on our radar from the beginning, as there are a large number of food processing companies that have made Brant County their home, and more are anticipated. We knew it was a stable industry, people are always going to need to eat, that had current demand and opportunity for growth. And we also knew that there were opportunities for both entry-level jobs as well as for advancement. So as we were exploring the post-secondary institutions that offered training in the area of food processing, we learned that a community college that is outside of the region we hope to serve, being Brant, Holland, and Norfolk, but not an unreasonable distance away, had recently invested in an institute of food processing. So this is a $5 million facility that provides real-life food processing learning and training. When we met with the folks from the institute and learned more about the programs that they were offering, we were amazed with what they were doing and found them to be a really unanticipated but amazing partner, which just confirmed our decision to look at food processing as our sector of choice. The other interesting learning that has emerged through our participation in the Career Ladders project is the value of service coordination. Career Ladders are looking to address not just learning and not just employment, but both learning and employment. And as a regional literacy network, we've coordinated many meetings between literacy services and employment services and worked to identify local partnership opportunities between the two types of organizations. Career Ladders provide very tangible reasons and opportunities for employment services and literacy services, plus other community partners and wraparound services to work towards a common goal. So we were very excited as well to sort of see how Career Ladders and service coordination could work together. As far as challenges go, I'll name just a couple. The first is time. To effectively look at a Career Ladders approach, you need to involve different sectors in each sector and partner, literacy, employment, post-secondary, economic development, Ontario Works, etc., has different values and perspectives. It takes time to learn about each other's potential roles and to come to understandings. Even though Essential Skills Ontario was extremely realistic, and I can probably speak for Janine and Anne-Marie when I say that we were really pleased to have the space to explore the feasibility of a Career Ladders approach, rather than try to explore the feasibility, implement, evaluate one, and so on, all within 1 year. So we're very grateful for that was very well thought out on ESO's part. The second challenge that I would identify is how to effectively work with employers. As a literacy network, we have never been very employer-facing, and we're much more agency-facing. We've had limited experience in trying to engage employers, but we had heard from other agencies that this is not always an easy task. On the flip side, or the good side, we were able to learn a lot from some of our partners, such as the Workforce Planning Board of Grand Erie and our Brantford, Ontario Works. And they advised us to wait and ensure that we knew what we as a group wanted and needed from employers before we reached out and tried to engage them. And as a result of this valuable feedback, we changed our minds about a couple of things. Earlier, Anne-Marie mentioned the town hall that they had, which did involve employers. We decided that we weren't quite ready during this phase of career ladders to have a town hall meeting because we still had questions ourselves about career ladders and some of the implementation things that we might have to address. So we didn't want to go engaging employers until we had a much better understanding of where we thought we were going, because we didn't want to be asked any questions that we couldn't answer. And I'm really glad that we listened to our partners and we didn't just rush in because we felt we needed to get it done. And again, in the spirit of learning, Essential Skills Ontario was very good about sort of meeting us where we're at. So we were grateful for that. And that's just sort of a 60-second overview of what we did in Literacy Link South Central.
Great, thank you very much. Since there were a few accolades passed to Essential Skills Ontario, I would also like to give some accolades back to LiNDR, Literacy Northwest, and Literacy Link South Central. One of the things that was really critical, and I'm glad this has been raised a number of times, is this is a long-term plan. We knew that we weren't going to be implementing anything this year, and frankly, in our plan for next steps, which we're very hopeful is going to be funded, really is very deliberate approach towards moving forward, right? We know that this will take at least 4 or 5 years to bring to fruition and another several years to bring into maturity. How do we know this? Because in every other jurisdiction, it's taken that long to implement. Someone might say, well, we don't have that long, but that you need to start somewhere. So while in the first year, we spent most of it measuring the appetite for career ladders and starting to mobilize people around the issues of the working poor and the low-skilled moving into employment. The next phase, it's a little bit more challenging. We're going to have to examine how do training programs and service delivery need to be modified. How would you modify it in order that it could allow for occupational progression? My sense from being in each of the communities, there's a lot of will to start doing this. And once again, accolades to the regional learning networks for mobilizing that. But we're going to have to get our hands dirty in the next round, provide some technical expertise, and start to fully determine and map out what a career ladder in each one of those industries will look like. So questions?
Okay, and I've unmuted Anne-Marie and Janine and Tamara as well in case that answers the question. So please, if you have questions, we have a few minutes left. We'll try to get through a few of them. And then if you have questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch with us. We have a question here. Have you consulted career service professionals or groups representing these practitioners in this process? If so, whom and what matter? And in what manner, sorry.
Right. So that would have been done within each community. We'd have to get Anne-Marie or Janine or Tamara on. They were certainly part of the consultations during the process at a community level.
Well, it's Tamara here, and I would say that our discussions to date have been more at the organizational level, and so the only feedback that we would have had from a career practitioner perspective, if I'm understanding the question correctly, would have been via our employment service partners. So we did not deliberately go out and seek information from that specific group. We worked with our employment service partners, but I would certainly be open if there is a next phase or a next round to looking at how we might be able to tap into the expertise of that particular group.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Yep.
My answer would be very similar to Tamara's. We, at the first stage of the project, most of our consultation with employment service managers, with employers, and so on, has been at a very high level.
Okay, perfect. Now, I'm assuming that this goes maybe to the U.S. examples, John, but are there any employers requesting career ladder certification, i.e. 1, 2, 3, or 4, in their job ads to search for applicants with appropriate job readiness skills?
Yes. So a good example of that is NOM's manufacturing stackable certificates. They've become the standard in manufacturing and not the exception.
Perfect. I guess this is a project question. Have you developed any resources or materials?
We will be, we're just finalizing a piece that will be going up on our website, and I suspect that that'll be up early in June, maybe towards the end of May. So basically a guidebook that sort of talks about the kinds of steps that each of the groups have been doing up until now. So basically what people are going to see is what I would define as career ladders at age 1.
Okay, perfect. I'm just seeing, I don't see, oh wait, I have a question regarding how better to assist recent immigrants who have professional experience back home. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure how applicable that would be. I haven't really done a lot of thinking about that. Maybe some of our partners have. Certainly immigrants, recent or otherwise, are almost always part of the career ladders process, but we haven't reached that particular stage yet in determining which particular groups that this is going to appeal to.
John, it's Tamara here, and again, we haven't reached that part of the stage in developing a career ladder either, but I would like to think that when we get to the mapping portion, where we're looking at what kinds of skills and qualities do people actually need to have and at what rung, so to speak, of the ladder, that might be an opportunity to look specifically at the needs of that group.
I think that in Durham we most likely will, when we start getting into the kind of moving parts of the initiative, work very closely with the, we have a fairly strong relationship with our social planning council that oversees 2 immigrant welcome centers, and they deliver ELT kind of employment/ESL link training that has been very well received in the community, so we would anticipate that they would represent those particular needs when we get to the actual design and mapping of the project.
This is Anne-Marie, and as I had mentioned, the Employment Plus committee that we're working with has representation on it from the Multicultural Association in Thunder Bay. So as the planning group membership, for lack of a better word, expands, and it will expand because our outreach is ongoing as we move forward with the Career Ladders Initiative. So depending on the various different groups, people, employers that are involved, we will try to recruit expertise to guide us in that manner.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to stop it there because it's just 2 o'clock now, and I think we've gotten through most of the questions. But if, of course, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to get in touch. Amber's just putting up the, John's putting up John's emails right there. So feel free to get in touch with John, and we'll put you through to the appropriate person, if not him. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to all our presenters, Anne-Marie, Janine, Tamara, and John. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amber. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.